The wagon wheels groaned along the rutted road, each turn echoing like a prayer whispered against the silence of the frontier dusk. Dust rose in pale clouds, catching the last fire of the sun, and drifted back over the tired horse, over the broad shoulders of the young man at the reins. His hat brim shadowed his face, but his eyes, keen and steady, stayed on the horizon. Beside him, slumped against the sideboard, lay a woman whose body bore more weight than the frail wagon board should hold, bones bent by pain, spirit pressed near breaking. Her daughter, no taller than his saddle horn might reach, sat wedged close, clutching her baby brother to her chest. The child was 12 months old, still with that unsteady, fluttering breath of infancy, and he whimpered against her thin shoulder. The girl's hair was tangled with dust and travel, yet her gaze carried something older than her years. She watched the stranger who guided their horse, and when the baby stirred, she held him tighter, rocking on the wagon plank as though she had been a mother all her life. The cowboy, 26, skin sun-browned, hands carved by ranch work, had not asked for this burden. He had found them on the roadside, broken and near fading with the daylight, and something in the girl's eyes had told him he could not keep riding. He had lifted the woman, near unconscious, into the wagon, then helped the girl with her brother. Since then, little had been said. Only the horse's slow clop, the cry of a far hawk, and the whisper of a dying wind filled the distance. When the child's soft wail grew louder, the girl looked down, murmured to him, and then, in a voice dry as dust, spoke words that struck through the quiet. "Don't beat. Mama's bones already shattered." The cowboy's hand tightened on the reins, the leather creaking. He turned his head slightly, seeing her small lips pressed together, the fear that shaped her words more than their sense. He did not speak at once, for some truths needed silence before answer. Then, softly, his voice low as creek water, he said, "The Lord gives rest to the weary child. Let her sleep. You hold on." She blinked at him, uncertain whether to believe, but when he reached into the saddlebag and drew out a canteen, offering it, her small fingers trembled as she took it. She drank a cautious sip, then lifted it carefully to her brother's mouth, wetting his lips. The cowboy watched without word, but a faint ache stirred in his chest, a memory of another pair of small hands he once knew, now long gone beneath prairie grass. The woman stirred then, groaning softly. Her head rolled, and her cracked lips parted. "Water," she whispered. The girl started to lift the canteen, but the cowboy leaned forward, steady hand supporting the woman's head, guiding the drink. She swallowed, coughed weakly, and fell back against the boards. For a moment her eyes opened, blue, clouded, rimmed with pain, and found his. "You didn't have to," she breathed. His reply came quiet, almost as if meant for himself. "Sometimes the Lord doesn't ask, ma'am. He just sets a soul in your path." The road stretched on, shadows longing as night crept from the horizon. The girl hummed low to calm her brother, though her own eyes drooped with exhaustion. She clung to him as though letting go would mean losing everything. The cowboy's glance fell often to her, then to the woman, then to the sky where the first star flickered faintly. He felt the weight of choice settling over him, whether to bring them to town, where eyes would cut sharper than whips, or to carry them beyond, where his own cabin by the creek lay waiting with quiet hearth. The horse slowed, feeling the day's labor. The wagon jostled over stones, and the baby let out a thin cry that tugged at every soul present. The cowboy loosened his grip on the reins, letting the animal find its pace, and leaned forward, speaking as if to himself yet meant for them all. "No one leaves you. Not while I've got hands to hold these reins." The girl looked at him then, properly looked, her eyes no longer dulled with dust but wide, searching for the truth in his face. She said nothing, only shifted her brother closer and leaned, just slightly, toward the steady form of the man guiding them. The woman's breath slowed, sliding back toward uneasy sleep. Night settled, stars spreading like lanterns across the endless black. The road bent toward the faint lights of town, where judgment and mercy mingled uneasily, waiting. The cowboy lifted his chin, watching the glow in the distance. His jaw tightened, and the horse's ears flicked forward. Behind him the girl's voice, small but carrying, whispered once more, "Don't let them hurt Mama again." His hands tightened on the reins, his silence an oath, and the wagon rolled on toward the edge of firelight, where eyes would meet them and stories would begin anew. Lanterns flickered alive one by one as the wagon creaked down the single stretch of the town's main street, their glow bending shadows against false-fronted stores and wooden porches. Evening had gathered, and with it the people. Men leaning on rails, women clutching shawls, children darting between their mothers' skirts. Laughter spilled sharp from the saloon, piano keys stumbling against the hum of voices, but it thinned to a hush as the wagon came into sight. The horses' hooves rang hollow against packed earth, each strike echoing louder than any shout. The cowboy kept his eyes forward, hat brim low, shoulders square. Yet he felt the weight of stares settling heavy as a rope around his chest. They weren't looking at him. They were fixed on the woman lying pale across the wagon bed, on the girl clutching her baby brother as though every hand in town were reaching to snatch him away. Judgment needed no words. It hung in the night like smoke, bitter and choking. A whisper carried, meant to be hidden but cutting clear. That's her. The one left beaten near the flats. Another voice, older, colder. A man's got no business dragging such trouble into town. The girl stiffened. She turned her face into her brother's hair, but not before the cowboy saw the tremor ripple through her small frame. He pulled gently on the reins, guiding the horse to a halt in front of the mercantile. The porch lamps cast a pale wash over the wagon, making every scar on the woman's face, every tear in her dress, visible to eyes that craved scandal more than mercy. The preacher stepped forward then, tall and gaunt, Bible tucked beneath his arm. He raised his voice so all could hear, "Judge not, lest ye be judged. For the measure ye mete shall be measured to you again." The words lingered in the cool air, defying the murmurs. A few bowed their heads. Most did not. The cowboy swung down from the seat, boots thudding against the ground. He moved with quiet steadiness, not rushing, not shrinking. The girl's wide eyes followed him as he tied the reins to the post, then reached for his coin purse. Inside the mercantile, the keeper hesitated, gaze flitting to the wagon, then back to the coins the cowboy laid on the counter. Flour, beans, a bit of coffee, cloth for bandages, all chosen quick and sure, as though a man could stitch a life back together with staples of bread and warmth. When he stepped back onto the porch, a woman whispered loud enough for him to hear, "He'll regret it. Mark my words, no good comes from carrying another man's shame." The cowboy's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he returned to the wagon, setting the supplies beneath the bench. The little girl finally found her voice, soft but urgent. "Mister, you're not leaving us here, are you?" Her hands clutched the baby so tight his whimper turned into a squeak. He crouched so his eyes met hers, lantern light touching the lines of dust on her cheeks. His voice was low, steady as oak. "No one leaves you. Not while I've got hands to hold these reins." Her lip trembled. For the first time since he'd found them, the child allowed her shoulders to ease, if only by a fraction. She looked at him not as a stranger but as something close to anchor. Behind them, the preacher spoke again, quieter now, almost to himself. "The Lord setteth the solitary in families." The cowboy straightened, untied the reins, and climbed back onto the bench. He clucked softly to the horse, and the wagon moved forward, away from the lamps, the whispers, the eyes. The sound of wheels grinding gravel filled the air, drowning out judgment, carrying them toward the darkness beyond town. As the last storefront slipped into shadow, the girl glanced back. She saw faces still watching, some curious, some scornful, a few touched with something like sorrow. She buried her face in her brother's hair, breathing in the faint warmth of him, as though to erase the image. The cowboy's gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead, but inside him stirred the weight of a choice already made. He would not leave them to this town's mercy, for he had seen what mercy meant in eyes like those. The wagon wheels turned steady toward the night, toward the unknown stretch of land where silence and creek water waited. The woman stirred again, eyes half opening. She whispered words barely shaped, yet clear enough for the cowboy to hear. Why do you carry us?" His hands flexed on the reins, but he did not answer at once. The horse snorted, breath clouding against the chill. Finally he spoke, voice little more than breath. "Because the Lord put you in my path. That's reason enough." Her eyes closed again, but a single tear slid across the bruised curve of her cheek, catching the lamplight of a town now behind them. The wagon rolled into deeper dark, stars thickening above. And though the night stretched wide and uncertain, the girl's small hand found its way to rest near the cowboy's sleeve, as though testing if he were still there. He did not move it away. The wagon groaned as it rolled into the hush of pine and creek song, leaving the town's clamor behind. The moon had climbed above the tree line, spilling silver across the worn trail. The cowboy's cabin came into view at last, a small shape of timber and stone, crouched close to the water's edge like it had been waiting for years. Smoke from an old chimney curled faint, stirred by the cool night breeze. To any passer-by it was nothing, a shack pressed against wilderness. But to the weary souls in the wagon, it was more than walls. It was the promise of a roof under which no eyes accused. He brought the horse to a halt, set the brake, and turned. The girl blinked at the cabin, her hair catching the moonlight, eyes wide and uncertain. Her baby brother whimpered against her, too young to understand but stirred by the smell of water and firewood. The woman, half-conscious, shifted with a low groan. The cowboy climbed down, his boots sinking into damp earth, and lifted her gently as though her frail frame might splinter in his arms. She weighed less than he expected, yet carried a heaviness of suffering no man could measure. He bore her through the creaking door, laying her on a cot against the far wall, where quilts faded with age had been folded neat. The girl hovered in the doorway, torn between fear and awe. He turned back, took the child from her arms, and set him in a shallow wooden box lined with cloth. The infant's cry softened to a curious coo at the nearness of warmth. "You'll both have rest," the cowboy said quietly. Then, noticing the girl's hesitance, he added, "Go on in. It won't bite." She stepped inside, bare feet brushing over the plank floor, eyes searching the space as though testing its honesty. He lit a lantern, and its glow spilled amber across the room. The walls held little: a table, 2 chairs, shelves of tools and jars, a stove blackened by years of meals. Sparse though it was, it breathed steadiness, not neglect. The girl touched a beam with her small hand and whispered, almost to herself, "Feels like it won't fall on us." He heard, but gave no reply, only busied himself with the stove. Soon the scent of broth filled the air, thin but warm. He ladled a portion into a tin cup, set it in her hands, and watched as she blew across the surface, then sipped with a cautiousness born of too many meager meals. Her eyes softened as she drank, and for the first time he saw something fragile flicker through, trust beginning to bloom like a shy ember. The woman stirred at the smell, her eyes cracking open. She tried to lift herself, but faltered. The cowboy steadied her shoulder with a gentle hand, offering the cup to her lips. She drank, trembling, then rasped, "You didn't have to." He looked at her, voice low and certain. "Sometimes the Lord doesn't ask, ma'am. He just sets a soul in your path." Her gaze lingered on him, heavy with questions she hadn't strength to speak, before she slipped back into uneasy sleep. The girl settled beside her mother, humming low to her brother as if determined to keep the dark at bay. Later, when the fire had drawn the chill from the cabin, the cowboy sat at the table, knife in hand, shaving curls from a piece of pine. Each stroke was slow, deliberate. The girl, too awake for sleep, crept closer to watch. "What are you making?" she asked. "A toy," he answered simply, chips of wood gathering at his boots. She tilted her head, squinting as the shape of a small horse began to appear beneath his hands. Her lips curved, faint but real, and she leaned against the chair leg as though claiming her place. Outside, the creek whispered against stone, and the wind shifted through the pines. Inside, the cabin breathed with quiet, the rhythm of fire crackle, infant sighs, and the faint scrape of a knife carving hope from wood. The cowboy's eyes rested briefly on the girl's face, then on the sleeping woman. He felt a weight stir in him, not of burden but of belonging, though he dared not name it yet. The night wore on. The lantern dimmed as its oil thinned. The girl's head sank to the table edge, lashes brushing her cheeks, her hands still outstretched near the wooden horse half-shaped. The cowboy set the knife aside, draped a blanket over her shoulders, and sat back. The fire threw his shadow against the wall, long and watchful. Beyond the door, the forest shifted, a wolf's distant cry threading through the stillness. The cowboy's hand hovered near the rifle propped in the corner, but he did not move. His ears caught something else, a sound softer, closer. The woman's lips, barely parting in sleep, whispered a word that reached him clear as if spoken in daylight. Home. The knife and would lay forgotten. The cowboy sat rigid, the word echoing against the quiet, burning deeper than any wound. He looked to the cot, where she lay fragile as glass, and to the children curled safe beside her. His chest tightened with a truth he had not sought but now could not turn from. And in that silence, broken only by fire and creek, he knew this night had already begun to change the shape of every tomorrow. Morning seeped into the cabin through the cracks between shutters, thin bands of light striping the rough floorboards. The cowboy had risen early, his boots soundless as he stoked the fire and carried water from the creek. The girl stirred first, rubbing her eyes and glancing at her brother, who slept heavy against the quilt. When she caught sight of the man crouched near the stove, she stilled, as though unsure whether to vanish back into dream or step forward. He looked over, gave a slight nod, and returned to his task. She finally padded closer, holding the hem of her dress. "Can I help?" He studied her a moment, then pointed to the bucket near the door. "You think you can carry half a pail of water?" Her chin lifted with stubborn pride, and though the handle bit into her small palms, she managed the weight with determination. By the time she set it down near the hearth, her cheeks were flushed, but she was smiling faintly, proud of the effort. He said nothing, only pushed the bucket nearer the fire with his boot, but the approval was in his eyes. The woman tried to rise later that morning, pressing against the cot frame with trembling arms. Her breath came ragged, her knees quaked beneath her, and she collapsed back with a gasp. Shame crossed her face, deep as any bruise. "I can't even stand," she whispered, voice raw with self-judgment. The cowboy steadied her shoulder, gentle but firm. "A body heals slow, but healing still. Don't measure yourself against what broke you." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she turned her face toward the wall, unwilling to let either him or her children see the weight of her defeat. Days passed, each carrying the rhythm of creek and fire, chores and hushed breaths. The girl followed the cowboy's stride, small legs working hard to match his longer steps. She fetched sticks for kindling, copied his way of checking the horse's harness, even folded her hands the way he did when silence stretched. In her mimicry there was trust, though fragile, and he felt it as a responsibility greater than land or cattle. But whispers traveled quicker than water downhill. A rider brought word from town. Folks were speaking ill, saying no man ought to bind himself to another's ruin, that pity would rot him from the inside. One woman declared the girl bore too much of her mother's shame in her eyes. The cowboy listened, jaw set, then dismissed the rider with a curt nod. Yet the words lingered, bitter as smoke. The preacher arrived a day later, scripture worn in his voice. Standing on the porch, he spoke with gravity. "The Lord setteth the solitary in families, son. And sometimes he tests a man's courage by the weight of the burden he lays upon him." The cowboy listened in silence, hat in hand, his eyes drifting to the doorway where the girl peeked, watching, and to the cot where her mother lay in shadow. When the preacher left, the cowboy closed the door and leaned against it, weary of battles fought not with guns but with tongues. That night, after the children had slept, the woman found words she had held back. Her voice trembled. "You're kind, but kindness don't last. Folks will tear you down same as they did me. You don't owe us a thing." The cowboy looked at her across the lantern's dim glow, shadows cutting his face into plains of stone. He reached for the wooden horse he had carved and set it gently in her son's sleeping hands. "I don't call this owing. I call it living." Her lips parted as if to protest, but the words faltered. She turned her gaze to her boy, the toy resting beneath his small fingers. Something inside her bent, less a breaking, more the slow untying of a knot long strangled by fear. The next day, the girl laughed for the first time. It came sudden, bubbling, as she watched the cowboy stumble when the horse sneezed hay into his face. The sound startled him, sharp and pure against the quiet, and he froze, then allowed the corner of his mouth to tilt into the faintest smile. She laughed harder at that, clutching her sides. The woman, watching from the cot, felt warmth break through her ribs like sunlight forcing past storm clouds. But peace, however tender, trembled under every gust of doubt. That evening, as rain began to patter on the roof, The woman whispered to the cowboy while her children slept. "If the town forces you to choose, you'll send us away, won't you?" Her voice cracked on the last word, raw with the memory of being cast aside. He looked at her, the lantern's flame mirrored in his eyes, steady and unflinching. "I've already chosen." The rain beat harder, drumming against the roof, filling the silence with its fierce insistence. She drew in a breath, half disbelief, half desperate hope. For the first time since she had been lifted into his wagon, her hand reached, trembling, across the quilt, as though testing whether trust could be touched. The cowboy did not move away. The storm came down hard, beating the roof as though the heavens themselves meant to shake the cabin from its posts. Wind pressed against the shutters, rattling them like bones, and rain sheeted across the window so thick no lantern could pierce beyond it. Inside, the fire hissed against the draft, and the lantern's glow swung faintly, spilling restless shadows across the walls. The woman stirred on the cot, her body taut with old memories sharper than any blade. The sound of thunder made her flinch, and her hand flew out, gathering her children close as if to shield them from blows that no longer came. The girl, clutching her brother, looked to the cowboy with wide eyes. Fear gave her voice a tremor. "Don't let the storm take us. Please." She pressed her small palm to his chest, desperate, her breath shallow as if she feared he might vanish like smoke. He lowered himself to his knees before her, his calloused hand covering hers with a weight that promised steadiness. "A storm can't claim what's already claimed by care," he said, his voice low, steady as oak roots anchoring deep in the earth. The baby whimpered, the sound of rain and thunder frightening him awake. The cowboy reached, lifting the child into his arms, rocking him with a rhythm born not of practice but of instinct. The boy's cries softened, lulled by the warmth of a body that would not let him fall. The girl edged closer, nestling at his side, as though certain now that his strength belonged to them as much as it belonged to him. Across the room, the woman's breath came fast. The storm was more than weather. It was memory. She saw again the shadow of fists, the weight of cruelty pressing her down, the endless nights when she prayed for mercy that never came. Her chest tightened, her hands shook. "They'll find us," she whispered, not knowing to whom she spoke. "The world always finds you when you're weak." The cowboy turned to her, the child still in his arms, the girl at his knee. "No one here will harm you," he said, quiet but certain. "Not while I stand." Lightning cracked the sky, white searing through the shutters. In its wake, silence stretched for the space of a heartbeat. Then the woman's tears spilled, unbidden, tracing the hollows of her cheeks. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed of the weakness, but her daughter slipped free and climbed onto the cot, pressing her small body against her mother's side. "Mama," she said, her voice trembling yet brave, "he's not going to leave us." The words were simple, child's words, but they struck through the woman's fear like a nail fixing wood to frame. She lowered her hand slowly, her gaze finding the cowboy where he stood, lantern glow haloing his broad frame, the infant resting quiet against him. He did not speak further. He did not need to. His silence was the vow. The storm raged on, rain drumming like drums of war, but inside the cabin, stillness began to take root. The woman's sobs quieted, the girl's hand stayed firm on her arm, the baby slept against the cowboy's chest. For the first time in years, she felt the shape of something she had thought lost: safety. Fragile, yes, but real enough to breathe. Hours passed, and the thunder rolled away toward the distant ridges. Rain softened to a patter, wind eased to a whisper through the pines. The cowboy laid the boy back into the makeshift crib, then set another log on the fire. The girl, exhausted, had curled against her mother, eyes closed, her hand still clutching her mother's sleeve as if binding her there. The woman met his gaze across the room. In her eyes was no longer only fear, but something new, hesitant as dawn light, belief. She spoke softly, each word heavy with the cost of saying it. "You've carried us farther than anyone had a right to." "Why?" He considered, hand resting on the back of the chair where he stood. The lantern flickered, throwing his shadow tall against the wall. "Because the Lord put you in my path. And because a man don't walk away from what's meant to be his charge." Her lips trembled, not with protest but with the weight of grace too long withheld. For a moment, she looked as though she might weep again, but instead she closed her eyes, whispering a word she had not dared in years. Home. The cowboy let the silence hold it. He watched the rise and fall of her breath, the children entwined with her, and he felt the truth settle deep in his chest. It was not a vow shouted in church, nor a promise carved in stone. It was bread shared at a wooden table, the scrape of a child's laugh breaking silence, the soft way a woman looked when she thought she was unseen. The lantern burned steady, its flame unwavering. And as dawn crept at last into the cabin, casting gold across worn planks and weary faces, the cowboy understood what had been written in this night. Not rescue, not charity, but belonging. And perhaps that was how homes were built, one quiet mercy at a time, strong enough to outlast every storm. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.